What's up, everyone? I'm Nate, as Andrew just said, and I'm so glad you're here to join us this morning. I want to welcome you to week 3 of our series, Free People, where we're talking about the relationship between freedom and rules. Now, the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about how some rules we really hate to follow, like they're just annoying, but some rules are really necessary in our lives. And then God's rule, his law of love, actually sets us free. So 2 weeks ago, Jim kicked off the series by talking with us about God's law of love and the freedom we find in it. And last week, Josh shared with us how we want to seek God's wisdom in that freedom so that we know how to use it properly. So this week, we're going to continue to explore what it means to be free people. Now, if you see me around, as some of you might have, I usually have a yo-yo in hand. You probably caught me with it. And this is actually a little hobby I picked up just to kind of kill some time. I picked this up end of my junior year when I had a mini school competition, and I got a free yo-yo out of it. And I was like, dude, this thing's like kind of cool. It's really fun. And I really wanted to learn how to actually use it properly. So I took the yo-yo home, and I spent an entire day watching YouTube videos from wise yo-yo senseis, trying to figure out how to use a yo-yo. And after a full day, I finally figured out how to throw a yo-yo. And I got it. It only took me a day. But then over the last few years, I've really gotten into just enjoying yo-yos. And I really just kind of fell in love with them, so much to the point that I've bought around 16 yo-yos over the last few years, and also only learned about that many tricks. So if you don't mind, I actually want to show you guys a few tricks real quick. Our first trick, which you might have seen in the past from a lot of different people, is called Rock the Baby in the Cradle. It's pretty standard, but there's a fun twist to it. If I had a spin, it goes around like that, and it's called Throw the Baby Out of the Cradle, which it makes me love it. That's my favorite trick just for that name. There's another little trick called Elevator, where you just make the yo-yo go up like that. And then you got the classic trick that pretty much everyone knows of around the world, and you can kind of step through it and stuff. And it's just a good time. But I want to show you guys what a true yo-yo master looks like with this quick video. So that was a national championship for a yo-yo competition. Yes, they actually have those, but I think we can all agree I'm much better than that guy. But the fun thing about yo-yos is that although you can do all kinds of cool tricks as you just saw with them, they're actually really simple. All they have is a little pair of discs with a screw going through them and a little ball bearing so it doesn't have friction. And then you just have this simple little string. And the string is literally nothing special. It's just a piece of cotton wound on itself. And they're so cheap that I even replace these monthly. But they're so vital to getting the yo-yo to work. For example, if I were to simply cut the string, the yo-yo is not going to do anything on its own. It's now useless. It's broken. In the same way, rules and laws affect our lives, and we can't work without them. So the truth is that to some degree, we need rules in our lives. But what if we didn't have to simply get rid of rules? What if we could change them or just simply make rules that fit what works best for us? If you were a supreme ruler for a day, what would you do with the rules around you? I know for me personally, one of the first things that comes to mind is I would take, because I'm in college and I have classes, I would take all those classes that start in the morning and I'd be like, no more classes before 10 a.m. I'm going to sleep in every day. Or I would say, I really like tacos. Let's do every other day. We'll have National Taco Tuesday, and every Mexican joint, whether it's Taco Bell or a proper Mexican place, will give me a free taco. Or better yet, how about, if anyone out here drives, you'll probably get this. What if you could make it that anyone down the road, when you're driving, they have to get out of your way, like you're a police car with your sirens on, and you can just zoom past everyone, no more slow drivers stopping you from getting to places you want to go. I actually did get to have an experience like this. Not quite to the degree of a supreme ruler, mind you, otherwise the world would be in a whole lot of trouble. But I got to plan something and had almost entire freedom with it. So real quick, how many of you guys out there have ever gone to a haunted house or like a haunted woods type experience? Show of hands. Okay, so good number. So this last year, I actually got to plan something like that. And we called it Scary Woods. There were two things that was really, really cool about me getting to plan this event. The first was that it was my university's first ever scare-based event. It was the first time that we literally decided our goal is going to make our students scream. Normally we've done karaoke or other fun little events, so this was the first time we went with scare factor. The second awesome thing was that this was an event that I had been pushing for us to have for about a year, and it was my idea on what it to look like. So they said, you get to have free reign and make it as fun or as scary as you want. So this event was entirely coming out of my brain, which was not a good idea. But it was awesome, as I was allowed to come up with all kinds of ways to scare everyone on campus, whether it was giving them nightmares or just a quick jump scare, especially for the people that were a little bit more annoying to me. I had all kinds of great ideas of what Scary Woods could look like. I had this whole thing planned out. I was gonna have a hayride that I was gonna fill with smoke through a fog machine, so it was like kind of like you couldn't really see your feet. And then we were gonna have a little Bluetooth speaker and have a friend actually narrate a story that we would play along with in the Scary Woods. So your mind's already thinking of the stories you walk through and you're really primed for it. I was going to simply just set up fog machines and dark lights everywhere so that you couldn't really tell what was going on and you'd feel disoriented. I was even going to create a long stretch of a walkway where we were going to cut the lights and remove people's flashlights and even the guide that they had so they feel completely alone in the dark, and all they could see was something in the distance standing there watching them, but they could never figure out what it was. Ultimately, my goal was to simply make some people walk into some woods and come out with a new set of nightmares. And I got so into it as I would explain it to my friends that I even started to laugh and giggle as I would explain it. I'd be like, I'm going to make them do this. And they'd look at me and they'd just be like, you need counseling, dude. That's not okay. But as the day of the event got closer, I actually had to make some hard decisions. You see, I had to balance what I wanted with Scary Woods and what was best for my community. My ultimate goal was not to make an event that me would enjoy, but to make something that everyone working to set it up and everyone going to the event would walk out feeling like they had a fun time. This meant that sometimes I had to stop what I was doing and turn around and explain to someone exactly what was going on because I realized I was running at 100 miles an hour and they were only at like 50. This meant that sometimes I had to lose some of the scare factor I wanted because I had to make sure things were actually safe for everyone. Because the last thing we want in Scary Woods is an actual real life scare. And this even meant dropping some of my favorite ideas, like the haunted hayride, because it was going to be a strain on the team I was working with, and I didn't want to add to the stress of their lives any more than we needed. It was frustrating to have to give up my freedom and my choices in an effort to be considerate of others. After all, in the heat of the moment, it's so difficult to make those choices for someone else. Some of the time, it's difficult because we don't really know how to best compromise with them. And some of the time, it's difficult because we just don't want to. We're in it for ourselves, and we want to make a choice that benefits us, because after all, we're the ones that are going to appreciate it. See, we feel like there's a string that's binding us, that's holding us down and stopping us from doing what we want. But that's not the life that God has called us to. For the last couple weeks, we've been talking about the most important rule God ever gave us. And although some people think God has a long list of rules, like we have a scribe that walks down and he's like, hear ye, thou shalt not, and thou shalt. God simply wants us to love people. Jesus even said in Matthew 22, 37 through 40, as he's talking to some Pharisees who try to trip him up, he just summarizes what God wants. And he basically says, all right, guys, listen up. There's two things you need to know about following God. The first is love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And then the second thing is you love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Everything God has ever commanded, every prophet that has ever decreed something from God, all of that can be summed up and followed simply by loving God and loving others. You see, according to Jesus, following God simply comes down to loving him wholly and loving others as much as we love ourselves. This law keeps us tied to the source of where we find direction. Now, the Great Commandment seems simple. After all, it's love others. Okay, check. But it's not so easy to do. So to help us understand how to follow the Great Commandment, I want to introduce you to my man, James. Now, James, we've been talking about him for the last couple weeks. So if you've been here, you already recognize this dude. That picture is ingrained in your mind. And man, he looks like he's chilling. But James, cool thing, was a brother of Jesus. So he wasn't just someone that followed Jesus. He was related to Jesus and still was like, I'm going to follow this guy as my Lord. James was also a leader of the church in Jerusalem when they were first getting started. And during that time, he understood how difficult it is to follow God's law of love, to follow the commands of Jesus. So James wrote a book or a letter that we now see in the Bible simply titled the Book of James, as he describes to us and helps to break down what it means to love people wholly and love God wholly. Now, James wasn't a king. He didn't have authority. He wasn't the Lord, but he was still considered a powerful person because of the wisdom and love he would show people. He even had a reputation for being so just that his nickname became James the Just. James did have a lot of authority and power and influence, but that was because people would look to him for wisdom. So when a dispute or when an argument arose among the churches, when they were trying to decide what they were supposed to do, what following Jesus looked like, they would always look to James and listen to what he had to say. And then they would trust him to make a final decision on who was right and who was wrong. Now, I want to pause for just a moment and lay out an important story for us that's going to help tie everything together. But it's going to feel a tiny bit disconnected for a moment, so just bear with me. So we're going to look real quick at the book of Acts. And this book comes right after the Gospels that we see at the beginning of the New Testament. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then Acts. And Acts features the disciples and other followers of Jesus after Jesus has ascended, and they're just kind of figuring out, okay, what do we do now? How do we follow Jesus now? So they're figuring that out, but they're also sharing so excitedly with everything Jesus has done for them. They're excited to share Jesus with the world. And in Acts 15, we actually see one of their how do we figure this out moments arise, featuring James. So in Acts 15, we see James in what's known as the Council at Jerusalem. And basically what happens is you have a bunch of people who follow Jesus, and a lot of them are originally Jewish. So they have their own sets and laws that they grew up with that they basically integrated into their way of following Jesus. And in their minds, they think everyone who follows Jesus needs to be Jewish. But there's some really difficult steps to being Jewish that would leave a lot of people really uncomfortable. And then everybody else who wasn't Jewish are known as Gentiles. And some of the people who've been preaching to the Gentiles are like, guys, look, God has been moving in these people's lives. We can't stop God from moving by saying they have to do a certain thing because God's already working on them. So they had an argument over, do we make these people convert to Judaism or not? And James listened carefully to what everyone had to say, and he sat back in silence and considered as the day went on and everybody voiced their opinions and their statements. And he thought about it. And he finally came to a decision in verse 19. In verse 19, James says, "And so my judgment is that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God." It's a pretty simple statement, but he's just saying we don't need to add extra steps for someone to follow God. James is declaring that no one should be forced to go through a process in order to follow Jesus. They simply have to turn to God and choose to follow Jesus. Now, this decision probably wasn't easy for James, and it actually probably would have made him uncomfortable. You see, first of all, James actually grew up Jewish. So it would have been easier for him to be like, guys, I'm Jewish, I know the way of life, you just follow me. So do what I do, and we're good to go. And it also would have been easier for him because if they made everyone convert to Judaism, they could have just been like, Jewish, Christian, check, you're good to go. Instead of like, are you following Jesus? Or yeah, lead a little bit more up to debate. But James decided he wanted to take a more difficult path. He understood that his decision, it wasn't going to impact the way God saw him or loved him. God wasn't going to look down and be like, you made them be Jewish, or you let them stay Gentile. God was going to love James no matter what. But James also understood and was committed to following Jesus' law of love. And he knew the most loving thing to do would to not stop people from being able to follow Jesus. He decided that his comfort was not as important as loving others. James didn't want to cut his string that bound him to God. Now, I wonder as James was writing his letter, the book of James, and all the lessons and experiences flowed through his mind as he tried to give all of his wisdom to everyone that wanted to follow Jesus. I wonder if this situation in Acts 15 actually was on his mind as he wrote the second chapter of his letter. And here in James 2:12 through 13, he simply says, "So whatever you do or whatever you say, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you." And just to give you a little context to what James is saying, in the 4 verses right before this passage, he's actually laying out the logic of why he's going to make this statement. So he's building up and explaining what he's about to say. And he directly references Jesus' own law of love and he quotes Jesus saying, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And James follows that up by making the same claim I made a few minutes ago of, if you love God and love your neighbor, then all the laws and the commandments that you're used to growing up are fulfilled in simply loving one another. So with that in mind, let's break down a little bit of what James is saying here in verses 13 or 12 and 13. Ooh, that echoed. The first thing that I noticed that James is saying here is that we are going to be judged. And this isn't a simple, the verdict is out judgment. But another way to look at it is we're going to be evaluated. We have a standard that God wants us to live by. He has given us freedom, but he still has a way that he wants us to live in that freedom. The second thing that James points out is important to this idea of judgment, and that is that the law gives freedom. God has given us a law that truly frees us and gives us our full potential, but he's going to judge us in that. It's like Uncle Ben used to say in the original Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. And God's freedom that he gives us is our great power, and we have a responsibility to use it right. And then that leads into our third point that James is making, and that is there's no mercy for the unmerciful. Now, he's not threatening us. He's not saying, be careful what you do. He's giving us a gentle warning that God expects us to show mercy to others because he's shown mercy to us already in the freedom he's given us. And then his final point is that God will continue to show mercy, and he will show mercy to those who are merciful. God wants us to show mercy, kindness, love to one another. That's the way he designed us. That's the plan he has for us to give us the utmost freedom. And when we live in that way that he's designed for us, that is both best for us and the way he designed, he looks at us and he's joyous and he smiles at us. You could say we have the freedom to treat people however we like. We totally do. But we are also, at the same time, totally free to cut our strings. But when we live in a way that prioritizes our wants, when I live in a way that is all about what Nate wants, all I'm doing is binding myself to my own desires. I'm not free. I'm just on autopilot to whatever I want in the moment. And when we're just as effective as a stringless yo-yo that just rolls away. That's why Jesus told us the most important thing we can do is love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and then love others, not just love them, but love them as much as we value ourselves. It's even why James is telling us to show mercy to others instead of judgment, because we'll never live freely as long as we're only living for ourselves. It's for this reason I can look back at Scary Woods and I'm really happy with how it turned out. It was a great event, but that's not because I ran with it and I did all these cool things. It was because I was willing to give up my freedom and make choices for other people that helped us all make the best event possible. There's one thing we will someday answer for, and that is, how did we love God and how did we love others? We could make decisions that benefit only ourselves, but free people make decisions that benefit others. As free people, we choose to let ourselves be connected by caring love for our neighbors, and we find further freedom in the grace and mercy we show them. In a position of obedience, of a lowly position, we're like a yo-yo. We let ourselves be guided by the string, by our love for others, and we find our full potential in what we're able to do through that connection. And in a position of leadership, we're like when I was planning Scary Woods. We use our freedom to make choices for others so that the end product of whatever we're all making together is the best for everyone. So we know what it looks like to be God's free people. But how can you and I what can we do right now as we live freely in the present? How can we make sure we don't end up cutting our string of love? We can simply start by just making decisions that benefit others. After all, someday in the future, you might be in charge. You probably will be in charge someday. It might be further in the future. You might be someone's boss or even a mentor or a parent. Or it might be closer and you might be in charge of a group project at school or a team captain. Either way, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to be in charge and make the rules. And you'll be wanting naturally to make those changes in a way that is easiest for you. But I want to warn you, don't do that. Using your authority for your own gain will be nice in the moment. It'll feel good, but it'll never leave a lasting satisfaction. Instead, we should follow James' lead by making decisions that benefit others. But this isn't something that you have to wait to practice in the future. You can begin right now. You can make small decisions that'll lead to a better future. You can begin by choosing the way you treat others is going to benefit them. Maybe it's the way you're just kind to them, or how you take notice that someone's struggling to carry a bunch of things and you grab something off their arms real quick and carry it with them, not take it away. Or maybe it's simply the things you say to people. Are your words being kind? Are you being uplifting? See, if you aren't prioritizing yourselves right now, when you gain influence, that priority is not going to change. You're going to continue to focus on yourself when you're in power. So you have to start that journey now. It has to become a habit. But how can we leverage the power and influence that we already have to benefit others? Think about some ways that you have influence. A really easy way is perhaps how you use your social media account. Now, I'm not saying you don't have to constantly post things that are like Bible verses, but I am saying perhaps next time you post something that's like, I'm looking great this morning, and you take a picture and you send it, maybe next time I just instead of simply saying, man, I look great, look at me, maybe it can be, I'm feeling great, and I want you guys to share in this amazing feeling I have today. It's going to be a good morning for all of us. Or maybe it's in the way that you can simply see someone in need, or even hold a door open for someone. There are all kinds of little ways where we can stop and take a moment and look at those around us and see how we can serve each other instead of simply serving ourselves. You see, thanks to Jesus, we do have freedom. He has freed us to live a full and abundant life, and he's so happy to have given that to us. But we will never live freely as long as we're only living for ourselves. We will never be free with a cut string. But free people make decisions that benefit others, and they are free to live a full life. Let me pray for you today. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to share in a life together with each other and just enjoy a good Sunday morning with some games and music and a wonderful worship service. Thank you for showing us how we can best live full lives, free lives as your people. Thank you for sending your Son to die on a cross to give us this opportunity. As we go about our days and our weeks, please send us your Spirit, guide us, and let us hear the ways that you want us to reach out and make decisions for other people. Let us see the ways that you want us to love others as much as we love ourselves. Let every moment that we give you be a glory to you as you are deserving of it for how good and gracious and merciful you are. Thank you again, and in your name we say, amen.